What's up, everybody? Jason from Jason's Exotic Reptiles back at you with another video. Today we're going to talk about one of the most controversial topics in the reptile industry, and that is feeding inside your enclosure versus outside the enclosure. Before we dive into the video, let's check out this awesome handful of little Brazilian rainbow boa babies that I had. So if you've watched my video from a few weeks ago, it was ultrasound versus baby Doppler. We weren't sure if they were going to be viable babies. Well, this is proof we have some beautiful baby rainbow boas here. This is a T-positive albino to a het albino rainbow boa, both T-positive. Beautiful little babies. There's your little T-positive albino. This is your het albino. They both just came out of shed, or all these babies just came out of shed. They were born about a week ago from the date I'm actually filming this, and super cool, awesome little babies. They just shed. I can't wait to get them eating. And let's talk about feeding in your enclosure versus outside of the enclosure. Feeding in the enclosure versus outside of the enclosure. There's pros and cons of both, and the mindset is what you need to program to figure out which is the best option for the animal and not for you. So let's talk about the pros and cons feeding inside the enclosure. Pro is it's super easy. I can open up the bin, I can put the rodent in, and the snake eats. Never need to touch it, can close it up, it's right back, it's comfortable. The con is that now, as I'm reaching into this bin, there's a potential that it thinks my hand is food. So we have to do something about that. Now let's talk about the advantages and disadvantages of feeding in a separate bin. So the primary advantage is you're taking the snake from its enclosure, putting it into a separate bin, and it never really associates your hand with food inside the cage. It's breaking that feeding response. It never gets fed in the cage, and it never expects food to come in the cage. The disadvantage is you have to usually wake this animal up, disturb it, put it in a separate bin, which it's now kind of what's happening to me. You feed it, you have to cover that bin up, come back later, make sure it ate, and then you have to disturb it again with the full meal in its stomach, which will risk regurgitation at times, and then you have to put it back into its enclosure and let it settle in again. So there's kind of a process of disruption that you have to do if you feed it outside the enclosure. Let's talk a little bit about what you don't necessarily think about, because that whole process seems to make sense to a lot of people. That's what they kind of focus on is, I don't want my snake ever to think my hand is food as it's coming inside the enclosure. And that makes sense at a surface level, but let's dive a little bit deeper into the reptile mindset. So if I'm feeding outside the enclosure, the primary advantage, as we discussed, is that I never need to worry about getting bit in there. But you have other risks such as regurgitation, and the one people don't consider is, well, now I need to transport the snake somewhere. It's used to feeding in a bin. So when it's most critical, I need to take this animal out, put it into a bin, and it is now in food category. So if you take the animal out and you are putting it in a bin to clean the cage, it's ready to eat. If you take the animal out, you put it in a bin to take it to the vet, it's ready to eat. If you just take it out to put it there temporarily, just so you can do something, you put it down, it's associating that with eating. And even if you take this animal out of the enclosure and you put it on your bed or on your floor as you're interacting, it may associate coming out of the enclosure with eating. That, to me, is the biggest reason why you never want to feed outside of the enclosure. If I feed in the enclosure, it's looking for food every time the enclosure opens. But once it comes out, there is no association of food is ever coming. That is the biggest component that I can't emphasize enough, is that I don't ever want a snake, when it's out, to be looking for food. I would rather it be looking for food in its enclosure than while I'm enjoying it, while I'm handing it to friends. Let's say I have a friend over, I put it down on the floor, I pick it up, and all of a sudden it bites me with a food response. That's because it's used to eating outside the enclosure. This you can get away with smaller snakes. You can really pick whichever option's best for you, but once you start getting into large snake territory, larger boas, Burmese pythons, reticulated pythons, even some really large colubrids, you never want that animal associating coming out of the cage with food. So I hope this is making sense, but I personally recommend feeding in the enclosure for that reason. You can address that. Now, what you would want to do if you feed in the enclosure is to hook train. I made a video on how to hook train and how to properly use a hook. Make sure to check that out if you're not sure, but a quick overview is I open the snake's enclosure, and if I'm going to feed it, I put the prey item right in. If I'm going to maneuver the water bowl, or if I'm going to take the animal out, I take a hook or a paper towel roll or something and just gently tap the snake's head. And over time, that snake realizes that if I'm getting a tap, there's no food coming. If there's no tap, I'm looking for food and I'm ready to go. So big picture, I can't hammer it enough. I never want this snake to be looking for food or food aggressive outside of the cage, which is why I always recommend feeding in the enclosure. I don't care if you have a little baby corn snake or if you have a giant reticulated python. In the enclosure, in my opinion, is what I would always recommend to anybody. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit that like button and drop a comment in the comment section. Let me know if you agree, disagree, what I didn't hit and what you also think should be added to that video. I can't add it after the fact, but I want people to read the comments and know that there's others out there who are looking to help people learn. If you're looking to join a community of reptile keepers and breeders and join some community chats, I have a Patreon with tiers from free all the way up to $300 a month. Check it out, patreon.com/Jason's Exotic Reptiles. If you're looking for any cool animals or reptiles to purchase, check out my website, jasonsexoticreptiles.com. Till next video, let's keep it moving.